Welcome to the Neurokrish Immersion. This is a podcast masterclass on the inspired brain, and we're considering how feeling, form, space, movement, and story rewire the human mind. And I'm going to take you through a journey of India's masters. Let me begin with a moment. Music plays, and music is such a common, big part of human experience. And when it does, something shifts inside you. So, before thought, before language, there is feeling. Sound moves us even before we understand it. And when sound moves us, the body responds. The mind catches up later. And we see so many examples of this in our everyday lives. But let me take you back to Akbar's court. When Emperor Akbar was ruling, Tansen was the great musician in his court. And someone who was inimical to him asked him to sing Rag Deepak, the Raga of fire. He did this with the knowledge that Tansen could burn alive when he sang the Raga. But what did Tansen do? He prepares to sing Rag Deepak and simultaneously prepares his daughter and a disciple to sing Megh Malhar, the Raga of monsoon, as a counter. Tansen begins to sing, and I'm sure you've seen this in various movies of that period. The heat builds, lamps start to light themselves. But as this happens, his daughter and disciple start to sing Megh Malhar. And as that peaks, it starts to rain. The legend that I just narrated is a parable. It's also a parable about the brain. Specific frequencies, rhythms, and intervals don't just decorate emotion, they regulate it. And this is something that we need to understand, as we also should understand that sound has the power to restore balance in the human brain. Now let's come down south to another legend in his lifetime, Saint Tyagaraja. In one episode, he is sitting in quiet devotion and he imagines Lord Krishna on a boat. And then the inner weather turns from joy to storm, from pride to surrender, from fear to grace. And from this single inward voyage, he composes 21 kritis, the Nauka Charitam, the chronicle of a boat that is not a boat. Before neuroscience had words for affect dynamics, kritis were already mapping how feeling moves, its rise, its break, its return. Music has the power to map the emotional journey. Let's talk about M.S. Subbulakshmi, someone of a more modern era, a legend again in her lifetime. In one unique episode, she walks into the United Nations General Assembly stage. The year was 1966. She goes on to sing Maitrim Bhajata, a hymn for the world. There are 100 plus nations in the room. No common tongue. Yet her one voice brings about a shared nervous system. No translation, no explanation needed. The room, composed of diplomats from 100 nations, falls silent. No one understands the words, but yet everyone understands the meaning. Music is older than language, and the brain still listens that way first. And you should go back and listen to the musical brain episode as well, as we talk so much about music. Sound has the power to become a connection. Now let's go from there to seeing. Form is how the abstract becomes recognizable. The eye is able to find what the mind can hold. Let's talk about the Chola bronze of Nataraja. He stands still, yet he dances. In one bronze figure, creation, preservation, destruction, illusion, grace, 5 cosmic acts in one human body ringed by fire, its stillness held in motion. Again, Srishti or creation, Sthiti or preservation, Samhara, destruction, Tirodhana, illusion, Anugraha, grace, all encompassed in this one bronze figure. And so significant is it that outside CERN today, the same Nataraja stands, the universe in motion, in form. He bridges the world between ancient art and modern science even today. Let's move on to talk about Raja Ravi Varma, 19th century Kerala. Before him, deities lived in temples, distant, hieratic, gold-leafed. He paints deities as people. Lakshmi has the eyes of a Kerala woman. Saraswati holds her veena like your aunt holds a baby. And then, through the new printing press, he sends these images into homes, calendars, and kitchens. So what does Raja Ravi Varma do? Not just a great painter who brings Hindu gods and goddesses to life. He also understands that recognition creates intimacy. The brain trusts a face it has seen before, even a divine one. And as the abstract becomes familiar, the devotion becomes a daily act. Gods in temple were distant figures made of gold. Gods in homes started to acquire those familiar feelings that made us recognize and relate. And if you practice Hinduism in any way and have figures in your home, a puja space, you're very likely to have one of Raja Ravi Varma's famous lithographs framed in some form or the other, most often calendar art. So we recognize and we relate, and that's the beauty of form and its impact on the brain. Let's move on to talk about living. Space is silent architecture. The room you sit in is doing something to the brain that's sitting in it. Let me make you sit with that for a moment. The room you sit in is doing something to the brain that is sitting in it. Let's think about Laurie Breaker, the famous architect who settled in Thiruvananthapuram, 20th century. He builds with brick, air and light. Before he builds a wall, he asks one question: is it necessary? He comes up with very environmentally friendly and culturally accessible innovations. Rat trap bond walls, jali screens, curved verandas. Nothing gratuitous. The rat trap bond uses less brick, lets in more air. The walls are cooler and the body is calmer. The jali screens filter light into patterns. Heat gets broken into shadows, and remember, in the south of India it's hot for much of the year. He uses honest materials, no paint, no plaster, surfaces that tell the truth. And in this way, his space shapes human experience. Let's move on to think about poetry and the written word, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Rabindranath Tagore, he doesn't write a manifesto. He writes a prayer for a state of attention. Fear narrows attention. Safety widens it. Inspiration is what an unafraid brain does naturally. It connects, sees the whole. It creates, makes the new. It receives and lets the world in. A free mind connects, creates, and receives. And this is the lesson from the beautiful poetry of Tagore. Let's talk a little bit about creating. Meaning that walks. The body is not just a vessel for ideas. The body is the idea. And here I bring in Rukmani Devi Arundale, the founder of Kalakshetra, 1936. She takes a stigmatized temple form, Bharatanatyam, and regrounds it as a classical art. In her hands, it becomes meaning that walks. Through her, the Ramayana is no longer narrated. It is lived through body, breath, gesture, and space. As a child, I remember going and watching her dance dramas, very, very evocative ones in Kalakshetra. And you do understand the power of communication, not just through music, not just through narration, but through the dance form. The body learns what the mind cannot read. Posture, rhythm, and gesture install meaning into muscle memory, embodied cognition, and all this happened centuries before the term existed. Dance becomes architecture in motion in her hands, and through her we understand the aesthetic power of dance. Now let's move on to think a little bit about movies, the ability to question and to tell stories. Story is the brain's safest laboratory. We rehearse change in fiction before we attempt it in life. And here I would like to bring forward one of my favorite filmmakers, K. Balachander. From 1965, he created movies that were a genre of their own. In his movies, he puts a woman at the center of the frame, not as decoration, not as victim, but as the moral engine of the story. And he works through symbol, conflict, silence. His visual metaphors smuggle the question past not just the censor, past our minds that are defensive. And indeed, very often audiences leave the theatre arguing with the screen, with each other, and with themselves. One very good example is Avalloru Thodargadai, the film in which he has a protagonist as a working woman and all the challenges of being a working woman in the time that he depicts this entire story happening. The narrative lets the brain feel what it has not yet lived, and a 2-hour film can do safely what years of argument cannot. It can change the frame. Stories, therefore, are a safe rehearsal. Symbols, for example, he very often used mirrors. They convey to us what cannot be conveyed directly. And conflict, This is what makes the brain pay attention. And thus, story in the hands of K. Balachander rehearses change, change in society, change in attitudes. So let's consider this entire Indic master's journey of aesthetics that we have undertaken. Let's think about Nada, the brain that feels. Tansen's legend captures the intuition that sound can modulate physiological states, foreshadowing how rhythm and tone entrain autonomic and limbic responses. Tyagaraja's compositions map shift emotional states, mirroring how the brain sequences and integrates affect across time through dynamic neural networks. MS's voice, I'm talking about MS Subbulakshmi of course, demonstrates that music can bypass language to engage shared neural circuits of emotion and empathy, creating collective resonance. Let's think about Rupa, the brain that sees. The Chola bronze of Nataraja compresses complex metaphysical processes into a single visual schema, much like the brain encodes dynamic systems into coherent symbolic representations. Raja Ravi Varma's humanized deities reveal how recognizable forms activate emotional salience networks, turning abstraction into personal meaning. Laurie Baker's spaces regulate air, light, and form in ways that subtly modulate sensory load, demonstrating how environment shapes attention, mood, and neural equilibrium. Rabindranath Tagore's Mind Without Fear exemplifies a globally integrated brain state where reduced inhibition and rich associative activity enable creative emergence. He ends it with Where My Country Awakes. Arundale's choreography shows how movement, rhythm, and form cohere into embodied cognition, engaging motor, emotional, and mirror systems simultaneously. Have you not cried in one of her dance dramas? Balachander's visual metaphors harness narrative and perception to induce cognitive dissonance, compelling the brain to reassess deeply held social schemas. This is the journey then, the neuroaesthetic journey: feeling, seeing, living, creating, questioning. Let me repeat that for you so you sit with it. A journey of feeling, seeing, living, creating, questioning. Aesthetics is not an ornament of the mind. It is the language through which the brain first feels, organizes, and ultimately transforms its experience of the world. We begin by feeling the world, we end by transforming it. And that is my story of the inspired brain using a range of Indic examples and metaphors. If you like what we do at the Neurokrish Immersion, please subscribe and share. We are on Apple, YouTube, and Spotify. Thank you so much.